The Agronomists is brought to you by US Borax, the Corn School, and ADAMA Canada. By listening to you and remaining unapologetically crop protection, we leverage the world's largest library of actives to provide innovative solutions to your greatest challenges. Tell your ADAMA sales rep what you're looking for today. Hi all, welcome to The Agronomists. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and we have had a last-minute lineup change. Dale Cowan having a little trouble tracking down, and so Peter Johnson's going to join us. I told them to quickly go put some makeup on. Okay, so welcome here, everyone. Thank you so much for everyone in the chat. As Kevin says, there, Canadian Cowman, looks like some new names in the chat. Great to see, and everyone wants to talk nitrogen on corn. Let's face it. So that is, of course, our topic tonight. A quick reminder, though, if you do collect those CEU credits, head on over to realagriculture.com/agronomists. Tomorrow, let us know you watched the show and grab those credits. But of course, also special tonight, tonight's discussion does count as a knowledge sharing event for OFCAF funding here in Ontario. So later in the program, we will be showing a QR code. So have your phones ready. That will take you to a form to fill out. And if anybody has any questions, we'll also share the email address. And Margaret is also in the chat. So so hi to Jim. Ellen is here, which is great. Mike and Les, I haven't seen that name in a long time. So great to see Les Nichols on as well. So hello to everyone. All right, let's bring in my guest tonight. So from Corteva, joining us from Iowa, we have Jason DeBruin. And from, somewhere in Ontario, not Dale Cowan, off-brand Dale Cowan, we have Peter Pete Johnson. Thanks for hopping on, bud.
Hey, thanks for having me. You know me, I'm always here to say something.
So, Jason, I don't know if you know Wheat Pete, but with his name, look, we even changed his name. He does every once in a while talk about corn, but he will want to talk about wheat. So we'll have to see what we can do. All right, Jason, we'll start with you though. I did mention you're down in Iowa. What is your role with Corteva? What keeps you busy these days?
So I'm a research scientist with Corteva. I guess to be specific, we're Corteva AgriScience. Yes, I'm located in Johnston, Iowa, the former headquarters of Pioneer Hybrid. I work on nitrogen. I've been working on nitrogen questions for 13 years now with Corteva, whether it's stabilizers, whether it's new fertilizer products, whether it's hybrids, whether it's other ways of increasing nitrogen use efficiency, and also working with our ERA hybrids to track how they perform to different nitrogen rates and what's the nitrogen use efficiency gain over time. So I've had lots of different experiences when it comes to nitrogen. So glad to be on and happy to be here.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for saying yes. Peter, also thank you for saying yes. My question to Dale I'm going to put the same one to you. We are talking nitrogen on corn. We are rapidly approaching that side dress timing. What do we know right now about nitrate levels? What can you give me for an update as far as what we've been testing? Have we been testing? What do we know?
So we have been testing, and I was going to be listening tonight to hear from Dale, because I know he's been pulling some, and he's the Adapt N program. Agris is following the Adapt N program, so maybe Jason can talk about that a little bit. He may have had more experience with it than I have, but it's one of these predictive tools, and Dale has been pulling soil nitrates to validate both Adapt N and also try to follow what was going on. What we do know, Lyndsey, from the little bit of nitrate sampling that I'm aware of, it does not look like we have very much mineralization this year, which I think makes perfect sense because we've like 1/3 of normal rainfall in May, plus relatively cool for the first part of May. So when it's cold and dry, we typically don't get much mineralization. And Jason, just to put it in perspective for you, we're under an inch in May in most locations in Ontario, and we normally get 3.4, 3.5 inches of rain in May. So the wheat crop also says, I know it's corn, but just let me tell you what the wheat crop tells the corn crop.
Right.
Like the wheat crop is more colors and shades of green in many fields than I've ever seen it before. And Jason, you're a corn guy. Wheat tells you everything, right? Wheat shows it all. It really, because it's 7.5-inch rows, so it's just that much tighter. And I've never seen some of the differences in wheat that before in my career. I don't think that I have this particular season. And as Nick Stockman, Nature Nut Nick, would say, this is the driest May in 42 years. The next closest was 34 millimeters, so 1.5 inches of rain. We're currently at about 23 or 24 millimeters, under an inch. So yeah. Yes, yeah.
Kara,
Ty, you're right.
our colleague Kara lives out in Bow Island, which has no island, but it also has no rain. I don't think they know what rain looks like there. That is a very dry area. They make rain there. They have irrigation. That's how they make it. Okay, but Pete, you're right. So wheat is the canary in the coal mine as far as perhaps mineralization, those sorts of things. So Jason, what are conditions like where you are? Do you even have wheat to be the canary in the coal mine? It's a valid question.
No, we do not. Not to any great extent. You will see some wheat, winter wheat, very little. It's hardly. We can't really talk about it.
Yeah. Okay, that's fair.
Mostly what you're going to see is some rye cover crops. Would be the most thing, and most of that's terminated pretty early. But we are sitting. It's very sporadic in terms of moisture. We were fortunate in the Des Moines area to receive about 2.5 inches in 3 days, which was fantastic. But then there are also a lot of places that haven't had really any significant rain in a month. So certainly dry. I was down in west central Illinois. Crop still looks fantastic there because they've got some 6% organic matter soils. But it's right there. The end rows are starting to go away. Wilting, yellowing is appearing to where we haven't put on enough nitrogen. So, yeah.
Right. Which brings us to where we're at. So go ahead, Pete.
Well, I was just going to ask. So the corn crop is the end rows are starting to show drought stress. What stage are you at, Jason? Because we're typically here, we would just be at like V3, maybe on the most advanced V2, V3, what we would refer to as 4 to 5 leaf corn, leaf over.
Yeah, we're not that much further ahead. We're at V5, V6. We had very cool early May. We planted, late April for what I was looking at last week. But then it just was a very cold spell that slowed emergence, slowed early growth. So we're sitting right at that V6 growth stage.
Yeah.
So
there was side dressing happening last week. So.
Yeah. Okay. And we're just basically starting side dressing here, right? So yeah, interesting. Cool.
Yeah, and I would say, so Warren Schneckenberger has entered the chat. Warren, you can let everybody know where your corn is at. But I will say here in the Ottawa Valley, probably a little bit behind where stuff is where you are, Pete, but not by much. That incredible heat, I mean, that crop took off. Has not looked back, but we could also use a drink. Now I will share, what was it? How many weeks ago was that? I got 120, I think it was 124 mils in not even 4 days. But since then, it has not rained a drop, so it's a little dry.
Cry me a river. Cry me a river.
I'm not going to, because I have forages and they look great because they have super root systems and they'll be fine if it rains later. Anyway, but let's talk in. Okay, so nitrates are one of the pulling those samples are one of the things that we're going to do, measuring off conditions. But Jason, walk us through, how do we use predictive tools to potentially decide on what that magic number is going to be for that side dress pass?
Yeah, which would have brought a few of my colleagues with me. So we,
the more
so many of you know,
really.
Exactly. We had, we had our granular nitrogen service. We were starting to deploy that in Canada. We've closed that business. I do have small amount of familiarity with AdaptN. Took it for a few test drives early on in its in deployment. I think it's a pretty quality tool run by some very good nitrogen scientists. But really, it's about, we didn't worry so much about that starting rate just because it's very hard to determine. It's very spatially variable. A lot of sampling to really hone in on what the actual nitrate level is. But again, I think um, even if you're down around, I don't know, 6-7 parts per million, even if you're 25% off, it still kind of gives you a range that you're on the low side. Of course, you want it to be much higher than that. And really, that if you think about like maybe just go to slide 3 that I shared with you, because really what these tools, all they're trying to do is say, we know that here's your yield target, and it takes this much nitrogen to meet that yield target. And we could have, gone to slide 1 and said, hey, if your yield target's 200 bushels, you're looking at something at around X amount of nitrogen. So we hold that constant, and then we're asking the supply function, what is it in the soil? What do we need to add? And then watch that thing be depleted over time. Now, heavy rainfall events, knock it down a little bit. Rapid uptake, take it down a little bit more. Very dry soil conditions are going to slow down root exploration, all those features that are critical to really supplying nitrogen. Mineralization. You think, well, last year was a very good mineralization year, at least in the States. We had moderate rainfall, but it was warm. Oh, we had so much mineralization. We only needed, I don't know, maybe 130 pounds of nitrogen to reach optimal yields. So we had fantastic mineralization year. But we've had years before where it's somewhere on the order of like 30 pounds, not much of anything, really, in the grand scheme of what it takes to produce a good corn crop. So those models they're extremely complex. They're working to take in all of those individual factors and make some sort of assessment about crop need and versus soil supply. And at some point they do cross over to where the supply goes down and the demand is, the uptake exceeds, and that's okay. It's just that you don't want it to occur at the wrong time. You don't want that blue line to drop too fast.
Right. So, Pete, where would you say, so if that line drops, where's that critical point? So we're approaching, as you said, side dress timing. What happens if we're a little bit late in a year like this one?
Well, I think if you look at Emerson Nafziger's work from Nebraska, he would say that the easiest way to limit corn yield is to starve your corn for nitrogen in the early growth stages, which is kind of interesting because uptake in the early growth stages is pretty minimal. But we really have kind of talked about needing that. What is it, 50 parts per million N in the root zone in that early growth stage. I think that's what Emerson talks about. And so when you say, where does that line cross, or where does it become critical? Well, the rapid uptake doesn't start till basically where Jason's at, kind of that V5 range is when it really takes off. V4 maybe. We're just getting to the point where it's going to start. I see Warren put in there that he's at V2 or two leaf collars, and a lot of corn here is that stage. So we're not quite there yet, but it's soon. Like once you're June 15th in Ontario, basically you're into rapid growth phase. If you starve the crop for nitrogen there, it's not going to be happy. But at the end of the day, the real critical phase is 2 weeks before tassel, and then through grain fill. And we know that we get lots of nitrogen uptake through grain fill with the corn crop. So maybe you can short it a little bit early on. And as long as you're solid by the 2 weeks before tassel, which for us is kind of July 1st or July 10th, maybe, depending on what part of the province you live in, then you're probably okay. But nonetheless, I want to see ample nitrogen supply throughout the whole corn development process, and the challenge is not to lose any and still have it there when the corn crop needs it, and like have enough there all the way through.
Mm-hmm. So, Jason, I think you've got a slide, and maybe you can walk it through us. It's the one where you sort of describe where the end goes, I think. It might be your second slide, because I think this is part of this conversation is, So can you walk us through this of sort of where it goes? So why we need a certain amount at certain times?
Sure. Yeah. So one of the fortunate parts of being at Corteva is I just had research space to put out trials pretty much each and every year, and enough manpower to grind up plant samples and a lab to do the analysis, which has been fantastic. So this comes from something on the order of, I don't know, several thousand data points, multiple years, trying to just take all that uncertainty in and just, so these are hopefully good ballpark numbers. And to produce 227 bushel corn took 232 pounds total consumed by the crop. And really what I'm trying to demonstrate here is that prior to flowering, the crop takes up about 58% of its total nitrogen. So then it's got this reservoir of nitrogen. It's stored up. It's ready to be deployed as remobilization to the crop, but only a certain part of that can be remobilized. You can't extract all the nitrogen from the stem. You wouldn't want to. And It's something on the order of, of the total grain nitrogen, 43% of it comes from remobilization and 57% of it comes from continued nitrogen uptake. We simply can't forget about the last quarter. Super important. So we're going from, 58% taken pre-plant, 42% of the crop or total nitrogen taken post-planting. So, you're thinking about what's the right rate and the right time with the right products included in it to get you some level of nitrogen post-flowering. Right? Those are the big things, because you can't count on mineralization.
At that point. And this is a good point, and I want to put it out to everyone watching. We absolutely are going to talk about deciding on, do you just put more N or do you try and minimize loss? We're going to talk about minimizing losses as well. So if you have questions about particular products or, strategies of how you should be handling this, please put them in there. We'll try and answer them if we can. I can't promise every question gets answered or that we have the answers to all questions, but if you have those questions, now is the time. Get them in early. Really important to ask those specific ones as well. Also, I just wanted to point out, Warren, that I asked what stage the corn is at. Everyone else is talking like V's and leaves, and you say collars, which I understand we can translate that. But come on, guys, let's get on the same page here. Okay.
So Lyndsey,
I do believe the collars is more technically correct.
Technical than the flipped leaf, I guess. Yeah. The leaf tips. Okay. Go ahead, Pete.
Can I just point out, that's really interesting data, Jason, because didn't Ross Bender, I think, wasn't his number 37% maybe, or 35% of the nitrogen after flowering? You're at 42%. That's an even higher number.
Yeah.
And that's really important to know and not let it run short through that grain fill phase.
Yeah. And part of this may be because we were working, in environments. We had some at our station down in Veluco, Chile, which can really push yields up into that 350, 360. And so that is included here. But again, that's what it takes to support that type of yield. You can go to slide 1. People think, that we've revolutionized nitrogen management, but the fact is 1.1 pounds of nitrogen, or 1.1 bushels per pound of nitrogen, still makes a heck of a lot of sense, because you've got grain nitrogen, you got vegetative tissue, and kind of you're up against harvest index. And so if you want 180 bushel of corn, you're somewhere right around 160 pounds of uptake. Multiply that by 0.58. That's what you need prior. 0.42. There you go. Rough estimate. Ballpark figures. Start doing the math of, what's your game plan.
And I'll just
go ahead.
Sorry, Lyndsey. I'll just add, because that 1.1 number is good for total uptake. Typically, if you look at the corn calculator here in Ontario, which has all of the Ontario research database in, it's more like 0.8 pounds per bushel is what we need to apply. But all that says is that we're getting mineralization. And I got to be careful with that 0.8 pounds, because Greg Stewart would say, well, yeah, it's 0.8 pounds after you factor in soil type and rotation and a bunch of other things to kind of come up with a base number. But we would say if you're going to grow 200 bushel corn, that 160 to at the upper end 180, and 180 will actually support 220 or 230 bushel corn most of the time here.
Agreed. Yeah. And there's a really flat payoff function at that top, right?
Yeah, for sure. And that we do at some point always have to bring this back to economics too. So unless everyone just has ample cash flying around and we're just going to spend all of our dollars. Okay, we are very quickly going to, I pulled one clip, Pete. Producer Jay said to me, we're going to only have one guest and you only pulled one clip. And I said, have no fear. We can fill an hour, no problem. And then Pete saved us anyway, but we would have talked for an hour anyway. But great question from Jason. And there's a few other ones that I want to ask as well about making this call on what that rate is going to be, what that magic number is going to be. So I pulled a clip. I think this is last year with Deb Campbell walking some cornfields. So we'll watch the clip. We'll hear from our sponsor, and then we'll get back to some of these questions and discuss what Deb shares in this clip.
Deb, how's it going?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Hey, and so is this corn. This is some nice looking corn.
This is amazing looking corn. It was one of the first plantings that we had this year. And we're a full 7-leaf stage, knee high, mid-June. And it's even got some tillers on it, some suckers, some people call them. But, it's really a sign that this is established well, lots of resources, and well on its way.
Yeah, and now the conversation turns to side dress nitrogen, what resources it needs to finish. And, that conversation about nitrogen ongoing all winter. Obviously, nitrogen prices up, softening a little bit. Then, you've got corn at $8.50. How do you take that conversation now? How do you have it now, Deb, regarding, how much nitrogen we can invest in this crop?
Well, the beauty of it now is that we're 6 weeks into the season. So we know how well our corn is established. We maybe had some targets on a crop plan back in the winter time based on those expensive fertilizer prices. This is a great window to reassess and do a gut check on that nitrogen plan that we had in place. Do we increase it? Do we soften it a little bit? What's the status of this corn today? And it comes down to, in a lot of cases, producers use that number of a pound of nitrogen per bushel of corn, and that's still a good place to start. Do we, in fact, have that true yield potential that we were anticipating? And I think in a lot of cases we do. The corn's off to a pretty good start in Ontario. And, how much nitrogen is on here? How much mineralization are we getting at this point in time? How much moisture have we had throughout the season? So a really good point in time to do a full resource check of nutrients on corn, whether it's tissue sampling, whether it's nitrate testing. Both of those are excellent tools to be able to pinpoint where the season's at.
Let's talk about nitrate testing. I mean, obviously, this year, kind of cool, but not too wet. And we're hearing nitrate tests come back as high as 90 parts per million, in those manure fields, though after cereal rye. How do we assess those numbers?
Yeah. So, nitrogen's tricky in that it's biologically driven and it's spatially different in the field. And one field's history is different from another field's history. So it's complex, right? And we try to make it as simple as we can. But in a lot of cases, going into a field, taking a soil nitrate test is a good point in time to be able to say, this is how much mineralization of nitrogen we have from those organic sources, and use that as part of the piece of the puzzle to put together that overall nitrogen side dress rate or top up rate that you think you might need.
Our sponsors for The Agronomists are ADAMA Canada, the Corn School, and US Borax. Understanding the interplay of macro and micronutrients is important when choosing fertilizer products and agricultural practices. The ag team at US Borax are experts in boron's role in soil and plant health, including how boron deficiency can limit yield even when sufficient macronutrients are applied. Backed by decades of field research and lab studies, we can provide recommendations tailored to your specific soil situation. Go to borax.com/radio for more. Oh, how different the years can be, Pete. How different. Okay, so but this dovetails nicely into this conversation about pulling samples potentially, nitrate levels, and where even you should be pulling these samples. So, but Pete, I'll start with you. As a quick update, we sort of covered this spring was not the same as last year. Last year, we ended up with some pretty amazing conditions, very dry in others, but pretty amazing. So let's work with, if we're going to do the nitrate testing, because again, we're waiting for some of the updates. Let's assume some of them are probably pretty low. So Jason asked, now this is out of Manitoba, but if you're going to do the nitrate testing before side dress, is there an optimum number you are looking for? So is there sort of a minimum, or that you still can add, you can still go after that top yield? Or is there a number where you would say this corn crop's already been shorted? I don't know if we can make it up. And I'll ask that of both of you. Pete, if you don't want to take it first, you don't have to, but give it a crack at it.
Yeah. So again, I come back to the NAFSIGR data, and if you're sampling in that row area, and I'd have to go and read the paper again, or maybe Jason knows for sure, but I'm pretty sure it was 50 parts per million of nitrogen we wanted in that row zone, in that by V6, by the 6-leaf stage of corn, essentially. And if you're below that, then that data would suggest probably you have lost a bit of yield. And you can't gain that back. There's no way to gain that back, which you'd say from the uptake, why is that? And I don't know why that is, but that's sort of that. But that's an in-row test, and so yeah, it's not an overall test. And if you compare last year, and that was a great clip from Deb and Byrne, because last year, just like Jason talked about, tremendous mineralization. I had hog growers that grew 272 bushel per acre corn on only 30 pounds of starter nitrogen. Now, they had manure in the history, they had spring manure, but that's pretty impressive, right? 30 pounds of applied commercial nitrogen. And so I have other clients that were hog producers, and they always put all their nitrogen on up front. And I convinced them this year. I said, don't do that. Come on, we can pre-hydrate nitrate test, and we'll give a value to that manure. And so we're sitting there now. We put, if I'm right in my memory banks, we put 100 pounds of nitrogen on, because they normally put on 190. And now I'm going to go to them, and we're probably going to pull nitrate soil samples, and they're going to be in the tank. And I'm going to say, you got to put on another 90 pounds of nitrogen. And they're saying, Johnson, you just cost me a trip through the field. Like, give your head a shake. Why am I paying you to be my agronomist? So I don't know, Jason, what do you think?
Yeah, working R&D.
So much easier.
Yeah, exactly. You can just say, well, it'd be better next year. So I go back, there's always a really nice, I always reference Bob Nielsen's work on just kind of thinking through what does a ppm soil test mean? If you have 30 parts per million nitrate, nitrogen, converting that to pounds per acre is something on the order of 120 pounds then per acre of available nitrogen. So if you're in that 50 range, you're somewhere up, 160 pounds sitting in the soil of potential nitrogen. And then you got to ask the question, where are you at in the growth stage, and what's your yield target? Or what do you think I shouldn't say yield target, because I don't want people to say have unreasonable ones. What do you think your biological potential is on that field, given where you sit today and your historical record, right? If you've ever had 200 bushel corn, 250 bushel corn, you may not think you're ever going to get 270 on 30 pounds. But that being said, if you believe it's biologically possible, you got to manage for it. But that getting back to the side dress, I see some of the questions in here. I agree with doing a combination of both, sampling in the strip and outside the strip, because really what you're trying to decide is, if I look at a square meter, what level of nitrate exists in that area, or on a hectare basis. And so you got to capture similar amounts of samples from each of those kind of high areas, low areas, to get a general sense of what you got.
Okay. Yeah. And so Oh, go ahead, Pete.
No, just to further that, because when we look at the corn nitrogen calculator here, we now have the opportunity to include that soil nitrate level at essentially V5 at the beginning of side dress time with what that recommendation would be. The corn nitrogen calculator will do it without that, but now we can bring that in. So Warren, I think if you sampled only between the row where you had not sampled or applied any nitrogen, then you would almost have to tell the calculator that you didn't apply any and let it go through that calculation and then deduct what you took off. But if you're going to sample in the zone, then you're probably, I think you're a 10-inch wide zone. You're probably 2 probes between, 1 probe in. You want to try to get that balance right and do a good job of mixing that so that you have the overall average number as accurate as possible.
Sounds like a lot of math, Pete. I'll be honest.
I love math. I love math.
I know.
Bring it on.
I tolerate math. I use it because I have to. Okay, but back to Jason's question. So Jason, you bring up a great point. So Jason Vogt asked the question. Jason, the guest. So many Jasons today. This is just great. Anyway, okay. Yeah, we've got producer Jay on the line. Okay. So, but to his point, where you really do have to think about what is a reasonable or a realistic, the biological, possibility of that corn crop. So now Jason Vogt's down in southern Manitoba. They can grow some good corn there. Yes, Pete, they can. And very good soybeans as well. So don't even start with me. I know it's Manitoba. But you do have to keep that in mind that, a 30 ppm at that point, based on what the overall crop potential is, may not necessarily be that you've left yield potential on the table, because maybe it is only in 180 or 160 bushel potential. So you do have to keep in mind what you're actually aiming for long term. Okay. Had to talk that one through to understand it. I hope that makes sense, Mr. Votes. If not, add some things in there. Okay, so Warren says getting the soil sampling correct in strip till has been a challenge, but he thinks they're getting it. So this is, Pete, you've pointed it out, and Jason, I don't know how much strip tillage is happening down where you are, but it does create sort of this thought process, right, of where you're putting things. There's still all that other soil. Roots are going to go other places. So how do you accurately gauge what's actually out there is definitely a challenge. Yeah.
And this year, getting the probe in 12 inches is going to be quite a challenge because the soil is so doggone dry. Like you need bigger guys than Wheat Pete to lean on the probe because it's so dry. I can't get it in 12 inches.
Yeah, well, maybe you need some forage in rotation, just putting it out there. Okay, so, but here's one of the other questions we get. Now, let's say we get some moisture, because we probably will. We're not, southern Alberta. So let's say that the rain shall return, and we've got some decent yield potential, those sorts of things. There is the question, and Jason, I'll start with you. What about nitrogen stabilizers? When do we use them? Why can't I just put on more N? And I say that the royal why can't we just put on more N? But let's go through this thought process of, do I just put more N, or should I stabilize and manage my losses? What does
I got to be careful here. I work for a company that sells both. Or not, doesn't sell nitrogen, but sells a couple different types of inhibitors.
I was going to say, so
yeah, exactly, right. You can't argue against a little extra nitrogen in lieu of an inhibitor. Now, however, I think there are other benefits that could potentially come along with the inhibitor being there. But I think let's keep in mind, though, the difference, and people somewhat refer to inhibitors all the same, but there are volatilization agents and there are true inhibitors that slow down nitrification. Now, I'm a big fan of nitrification inhibitors if you're doing fall applied nitrogen, which is probably very uncommon in Canada.
Common in the West.
Much more common.
Yeah. Western Canada does.
Is that wrong?
Does
okay.
Quite a bit. No, but Ontario, none.
Okay.
Like zero. So
none. Yeah, that's what.
Yeah.
Whereas we do a fair amount in the States, and we do a lot of manure application. So, big fan of the nitrification inhibitors in the fall applications, whether that's anhydrous or whether that's manure. A little bit less excited about them in the spring and not excited about them really at all in the side dress time frame, just because I don't want to slow down that nitrogen conversion. I don't want it to get tied up in nitrate or stay in that ammonia form too long. I mean, a crop can take up ammonia, but I haven't seen strong benefit. Now, I'm a fan of volatilization agents if you're not putting it in the soil. Those do work very effectively. I mean, you can lose a lot on volatilization if it's a wet soil and you're putting down urea or a UAN right on the surface. You can be losing some nitrogen. So there, you can go for some efficiencies. But back to the question, why not just apply more? I think there are some environmental benefits, and hopefully growers will start to get paid for those in the future by taking good actions rather than applying more, because I think an inhibitor or a volatilization agent can have some activity even if it's raining 2-3 inches and running around on the soil surface or running through the soil, as opposed to more nitrogen. You just get a bigger flush out of the system. So, I mean, but again, at the end of the day, when you're doing the math, there's that math again. It may pencil out that a little extra nitrogen goes further, right?
Yeah.
That's so one of the benefits of being a research scientist, is you don't have to pay the bills.
Yeah. And I'll just jump in for a minute, because I really think from an environmental standpoint, just more nitrogen doesn't cut it anymore. And the other side of that, and it's really interesting to me, but if you're in a loss situation and you add more nitrogen, that added nitrogen, because you get the enzymes that are causing volatilization, or the bacteria that are causing that change to nitrous oxide, they have more of it there. And so they actually drive the loss process worse. So adding more nitrogen doesn't solve the problem. It actually exacerbates the problem. And that's why split nitrogen actually reduces our nitrous oxide losses. Split nitrogen is the best way to reduce nitrous oxide losses, because we never build a big pool of ammonium, and then the nitrous ammonium and nitrobacter, the bugs in the soil that change that to nitrate, don't have that massive pool of ammonium, and they don't short circuit the system. If they have a smaller pool of ammonium, they take it all the way to nitrate, and they don't let it go off as nitrous oxide. So as much as the easy answer used to be, don't spend the money on the inhibitor, like, dang it, just buy more nitrogen, I think we've come beyond that. I really think that we, certainly from a greenhouse gas nitrous oxide emission, more nitrogen can exacerbate the system or the problem and actually increase losses, and you end up with no more nitrogen, even though you thought you were going to.
All right, so I'm going to pause there for just a moment. Because Jim's got some very specific questions that I think bring in some of this ESN question, brings in we've also got a great comment from Kevin about broadcast versus working it in. But very quickly, I'm going to warn everyone. So if you are on tonight's broadcast to get your knowledge sharing event credit, we are going to show the QR code in just a moment. We're going to throw to our last sponsor read, and then producer Jay is going to have it on the screen. So have your phones ready. Just open your camera, and you'll be able to take that, and that QR code is going to take you to a form to fill out. We've also got an email address that we can share if you have any issues with that. And Margaret May, I believe, is somewhere on the chat. So depending on which platform she's on, you might be able to talk to her directly, but she is around as well. Okay, so producer Jay, if you can throw to our read, and then we'll get to the QR code. Our sponsors for the Agronomists are ADAMA Canada, US Borax, and the Corn School. Big corn yields demand intense management. From tillage strategies to nitrogen management, variety selection, pest management, and more, Real Agriculture's Corn School is a video series that tackles every facet of the corn growing season in an engaging and informative format. The Corn School is made possible through BASF and Pride Seeds. Learn more at cornschool.com. I like our extra music. All right, producer Jay, if you can. All right, so for all of you collecting those knowledge sharing event credits. I don't know what we call them. This is a QR code. Use your phone. We'll probably show it one more time at the end of the broadcast. But if it doesn't work, or if you have any questions, the email address is offcaf@ontariosoilcrop.org. So if you have any issues, just zip them an email. If you know Margaret, you can probably also email her. Sorry, Margaret. Maybe she didn't want everyone to email her. Maybe she did. We'll find out. Either way, if you could just zip us an email, we'll get you sorted for watching the broadcast tonight. So thank you to OSCAA for organizing all that. Yes, if you have any issues, just drop us an email and we'll get you sorted. Okay, let's go back to some of our practices. So Jim McComb's got a great question here. So he's got a client knifing 50-50 ESN urea. So it's a blend, 5 inches deep with Alori openers. I don't know if I'm saying that right. At 5 collars, which is the more technical, I'm told, way to measure corn plants. All right. Retail wants ESN in there. I tell them no value at 5 inches. If the slot is closed, it's not going to volatilize. Who's right? Jason, is Jim right, or is the retail, who shall remain nameless, who's right?
Jim's right. Jim's right. And
Great
and
job,
if you really
Jim.
want, Jim, there's some great work at the University of Guelph. I don't know where you're at, Jim, but the University of Guelph is doing a very nice study where they're actually measuring volatilization in season following applications of urea being laid on the surface or being placed in a trench and covered along with UAN. And I have some of the Midwestern data. And basically, urea left to its own demise on the surface decides to volatilize quite a bit. And pretty much anything else you do, as long as you put some volatilization agent with it, you could lay it on the surface. So that, I think, addresses a question. Where did I see it? Canadian Cowman.
Yes. Now we're going to talk spinner spreaders, broadcast versus cultivation. I'll be honest, Pete, I know we use a lot of spinner spreaders here in Ontario, but it hurts my feelings a little bit. Like, it really
I know,
does.
but I hated the practice. I thought I hated the practice. And then I actually went out and measured the volatilization. And if you put an inhibitor or a volatilization agent with it, works pretty well.
Not so bad. Pete,
yeah,
jump in here. Save me.
Just wait. So stop. Wait. We're not. From a volatilization standpoint, Jason is 100% right. We can treat it. We can spend the dollars on treating it, and we certainly get a fair level of protection. But spinner spreaders, are you kidding me? Those things couldn't be accurate if they those Wilmar spreaders. You should just take the cutting torch and turn them into plowshares or something that's worthwhile, for crying out. Wow.
Okay, so we're talking about two different things, though. There's one is the
absolutely.
uniformity of spread, but the other is the risk.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're going to leave it on the surface, we do have to protect it from loss if we don't have a rain coming. But then uniformity of actual application, it's like can I say shit? It's like a shit flicker that just throws it everywhere, and away we go.
Be careful, because some of the European technology, some of the where we can adjust the drop point on the spinner, and where we can adjust the angle on the blades on the spinner, like not all of that technology is not very good. I think Warren will be in the chat saying, "Oh my gosh, I have a spinner spreader that actually works, right? It does point and so that technology can work, but spinners in general, a lot, if you just go hook up to one at the local agribusiness outlet, the chances are it's not doing a good job."
Okay. Warren did get a cheeky comment in, Pete. What's worse, a spinner spreader or a hoe drill? So Jason, you should know that Pete has a hate on for hoe drills. So there you go.
I'm just kind of envisioning what a hoe drill is, and I don't know if I know.
Pete. Yeah. Oh yeah. Did they not call them hoe drills? Spill drills. There we go.
No, it's a hoe drill. It's just, see, the problem is Jason only understands corn and soybeans.
That's right.
It's corn. Yeah. So this is So anyway, doesn't matter. We can rumble on, but this the one thing I would say to Jim's comment is that 5 inches deep and well covered, the loss is zero, right? Like the loss is just zero, period. Unless you get 27 inches of rain and you actually get some denitrification
yeah.
from, and in a corn crop that's rapidly taking up water, that risk is really low. Plus, as was pointed out, the ESN could potentially slow the release of that urea to the crop. And dang it, when we're at high demand, we want that nitrogen to be there. So you pay more for protection you don't need, and you could potentially, it's unlikely at this stage, but it is possible you could short the crop, and that is not what we want to do.
So one challenge
Well,
to
I'm
that,
not all
though,
negative again. Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. One challenge to that, though, because we have had this conversation before about not getting enough depth and not closing the slot. That would be worse. So, yeah,
but that's totally different.
That.
Yeah. So if you are knifing 28% into a slot 2 inches deep, and the slot stays open, and so now the 28% goes into moisture in the slot and nothing covered. What's the worst scenario for loss? It's when you have the moisture to hydrolyze the urea portion of the 28% and not covered, because it hydrolyzes to ammonia. Ammonia is a gas, and off it goes. In that case, it's actually better to lay it on a dry soil surface, because then there's no water to hydrolyze it, and you don't get that volatilization. Be careful with that, because you use Y drops, and I'd love to hear Jason's comments on Y drops, because now we're on dry soil. It's dry right now. We lay that side dress band beside the corn plant. We get a heavy dew. The heavy dew funnels that moisture down to the base of the plant and just makes it a little bit damp. It's never enough moisture to move it into the soil. Now all of a sudden that's not dry soil, and I think that sort of sets us up for loss situations. On the other hand, if it rains an inch, you put it on, it rains an inch, who cares? It doesn't matter what you do, it's all good.
Perfect. That's exactly how it was supposed to work.
Exactly. Rain covers lots of sins. Okay, but Jason, I love this question, because there was a time where I'm pretty sure Y drops are going to save everything from everything. So where are we at? How, are Y drops a good tool used in certain situations? How does it, or do we just need an inch of rain and it doesn't?
I know growers are using them. Putting the UAN on the surface is not like Pete said. If it hits dry soil, it's usually pretty fine, and then it gets a rain, and it's good to go. If it hits moist soil, you're in trouble, because you are going to start that volatilization process. I certainly, if you're going for nitrogen use efficiency, it's certainly a functional tool. But man, driving through tall corn's not that much fun. So
that too.
You see studies that show the benefits, but you also see a number of studies that have demonstrated no benefit. So again, and this is a cop-out answer all the time for agronomists and scientists alike, is just exactly. Those who have water just away.
Turn the pivot on.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, there you go. Super easy farming.
So it's back to the Y drop's a great tool, effective tool in the right environments. And so that's a long way of saying we don't really know exactly when to use it and when to deploy it. I mean, it might be easier, in the simplest scenario of a nitrogen management plan that wants to minimize nitrogen use, but an effective uptake a little bit prior to planting, so that you do not have any deficiency when the crop starts to take it up, maybe a little on the planter, and then hit it with a pretty sizable load with some nitrification, or not nitrification inhibitor, but a volatilization inhibitor if you need it, right before V5, V6. It's going to be a pretty solid program. I mean, let's face it, it's going to be pretty hard to beat that for almost 80 to 90% of the acres out there. I mean, there's those few acres that could really benefit from a late shot, but we shouldn't overcomplicate nitrogen too much.
But it's so complicated. Pete, go ahead.
It is so complicated, which is why we simply just can't fool ourselves into thinking we know all that we need to know to make the right recommendation.
Yeah. all the time.
So protect yourself, think logically. There are tools out there, but then it also comes down to, do you really want to be outside dressing corn at V16 in July?
Apparently Warren does. So Warren counters, Mr. Schneckberger, so he says now, and this is a consideration as well, is that it would have to pay a lot more to stop Y dropping 120 feet in a pass and go back to knee-high coulter rigs, he says. So there is the efficiency factor is getting across the field. Also, Warren likes driving equipment. So just saying, maybe he likes corn.
We come back to the system, right? And so this is where you, like Warren's point, it's not 100% of his nitrogen at Y drop, and he's not at V16. He's actually probably more like at V9 or V10. So, we're trying to get in there a little bit earlier, and I'm not exactly sure how much he puts on up front. But I really do think in an Ontario situation that most of the time we sort of want to have a reasonable shot. The growers that put 30 pounds on with the planter, right, up to this point, and I'm getting this question now. So I put 30 pounds on with the planter, and now it's so dry. Can I get that nitrogen, my side dress nitrogen, into soil moisture where the plant, it will actually move to the plant and the plant can pick it up? And so there is some level of insurance almost to have a reasonable amount pre-plant under Ontario conditions, just the way that it's working out. And Jason, we don't farm, the 6 foot of topsoil ground that you're used to in Johnson, Iowa. We have 6 inches of topsoil, and then we get subsoil, and it can be a bit of a challenge because we don't have a lot of topsoil to play with. And I think it comes down to the system. In Warren's system, I imagine he has a decent shot up front. He's coming back at, I see he says V10. And so it gives a wider window for rainfall to happen and to move that into the soil. By V10, his volatilization losses are probably somewhat protected because there's not much wind in the bottom of the canopy to take that ammonia gas away. So nitrogen, there are some complicating factors, and I think you really do have to look at it as a system.
Agreed. I like it. Now, okay, so Andy's got a question. Jason, I'll ask you this. Any truth to N only moving vertically? Hence, Y drop advantage applied over center of rows. I don't know that I've ever heard this before. It's allergic to horizontal movement and only
I mean, obviously the question about the roots coming their angle like this, and when do they hit the center of the row? Normally corn roots, probably by V10, they're hitting the center of a 30-inch row or 76 centimeter row. That being said, though,
and there's only moving vertically.
There's a certain amount of time.
Can I answer?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Go ahead. Pete, give it a go. I got nothing.
I call bullshit. Okay, it's absolutely not correct. I apologize. I used a bad word on air.
Yeah,
but think about this, Andy.
We'll bleep it out.
That nitrate moves with the water. If the roots have not yet reached to that band in the middle, they are sucking water, and so as they pull water through capillary action, and the capillary action moves laterally through the soil. If it didn't move laterally through the soil, your tile drains would never work. So the water moves laterally, the nitrogen moves with the water laterally, and it goes to the roots. Now, it has to be in the nitrate form in order for that to happen. But, man, if it didn't move laterally in the soil, then there'd be a whole lot of things in the wheat crop that would never, ever work. And so, once again, I got to finish on wheat. But
here we go. Yeah. Producer Jay says this is rapidly turning into Real Ag After Dark. We've said a swear word 4 times, and this particular show isn't even about manure. But there you go. So there you go. Okay. So, but I like it because sometimes we need to be told that certain things aren't a certain way, and that's good. Now, just quickly, If anyone's got any last questions, please. We're running out of time here. So if you've got any more, this has been fantastic discussion. We are going to put the QR code up again. Margaret did message me and said it was a little too blurry. So producer Jay, I don't know if you can make it bigger, but if anyone has had any issues, if the QR code did not work for you, you are not alone. So for some people it didn't work. Just email either Margaret or the OFCAF at ontariosoilcrop.org, and we will get you sorted out. You can, of course, also email any of us, and we'll get you sorted. All right. Kara pops on again, still triggered over this entire comment about rain, and it is true. But Kara, in all fairness, you do have irrigation, or irritation, as you call it, and you can just make it rain. So I don't understand why anybody... No, you need the water to draw from to put it over your fields. I understand how this works. And rain is always better. So there you go. Okay, I want to end on, just quickly if we can, Jason, you do a lot of work with nitrogen use efficiency. This is, of course, a big part of when we talk about, the environmental impact, but also the economic discussion of, nitrogen use efficiency. So is there a sort of textbook most efficient way, if we're going to apply nitrogen to corn, that you're like, here is the recipe, I retire? Is there one?
Yeah, I wish, right? I wish. Right. I think because as soon as you say something's perfect, growers, and here's the other thing I like to say as a scientist, is that I cannot come up with all of the iterations that growers have been able to put together that work on their farms. So that's probably why I simply approach it as just a math function of, this much in the residue, this much in the grain, this much in the stover at the end of the season. This is kind of the supply and demand function. Now, how you achieve that in terms of your labor, in terms of your choice of nitrogen application equipment, it's kind of in your hands now. Now, that being said, I think, number one, we can probably say that fall applied nitrogen is not going to be one of the most efficient ways. Overall, no. Like, in the words of Jason, vote, full stop.
Vote.
I mean,
yeah, there
vote.
You go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Full. I mean, okay. That one's pretty logical. Like, yeah. But there's a whole sense of logistics to it.
Yep.
That enable the farmer, to just work their operation in a nice way, right? So there's some of these benefits. That you're giving up efficiencies, but you're gaining them in other places. That being said, we know a spring program is great, but a spring program comes with its own challenges, right? Of wet soils, which I'm sure you've never experienced in the spring.
Not ever. No.
Wet, cold soils, never once, right?
Yeah.
No.
Never once. Yeah.
So you've got issues there. I was talking with Paul over in Ontario, and I said, a really cool program. If I had to redesign a program for my family's farm, I would think about putting down nitrogen with a volatilization agent, with some pre-chemistry, with some herbicide, about 30 pounds. Then I put some starter down, another 30 pounds. And then I'd finish it off with something, maybe I'd put a little more, somewhere to get me to about, 60% of my total desired before I did anything side dress.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I don't know, you're probably dealing with really flat, nice fields. We farm hills where I'm from. And so
there's a few flat ones around here, but not.
We're pretty scared of side dress because of all the point rows we're going to knock down and everything. So we actually, we're big on manure. If everyone had manure on their farm, it'd be great, right?
Well, some of us have, some of us has plenty, but other people shun livestock, and they're wrong, right, Pete? All right, so Pete, do you have an idea?
The reason you don't like that is because then they don't have they don't have animals.
That's right.
They have forages. You need livestock. So
yeah, I'm telling you, people, you need more forages. All right, Pete, is there? While we wrap this up, Jason, great point. Efficiency isn't just about the nitrogen use. Although we can talk about that, it's about the system. It's about figuring out workload and conditions. So if you could put the recipe together, Pete, what does it look like on corn? Please focus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just like you always focus on woolly pigs, Lyndsey.
Yes, any chance I can.
There's lots of systems that can work, but I think typically in Ontario, if we want at least an absolute minimum is kind of 60 pounds of nitrogen up front, and up to probably 100, or maybe at the upper end 120 pounds of nitrogen up front. And again, it would depend on scenario. Do you have manure? Like, do you have red clover in the rotation that you can count on some nitrogen from that? My sweet spot is 100 pounds of nitrogen up front. Do the pre-side nitrate test, and then make your side dress application based on that. And some years you probably go back with only 10 gallons of 28 because 130 is all you need because it was 2022. Other years, it's 2023. We've got zero mineralization. Yeah, we might be going back with another 30 or 35 gallons for crying out loud if we have 250 bushel yield potential.
Mm-hmm. It has to rain, though. Okay, Pete? It looks like I might get some this week. That's because we want to cut hay. So that's the problem.
You don't have your hay cut yet? Lord.
No, we've been lambing. So thank you. But if you would like to send a helper at any time, you may. Anyway, besides, we're not a dairy farm. We don't need super perfect, amazing hay. Okay, this has been fantastic. Pete, thank you so much for hopping on at the last minute. I hope Dale's okay. Haven't heard what all happened, so we'll find out. Jason, really appreciate you coming on. This has been fantastic. Of course, thank you to everyone in the comments for joining and asking some great questions. A reminder, of course, if you collect those CU credits, head to realagriculture.com/agronomists tomorrow. Let us know. And if you had any issues with the OFCAF QR code, just let us know. We'll get you connected. Next week, we are going to talk about cereal leaf diseases. Peter, you'll want to catch that one. And we're planning other ones as well. So as the growing season goes on, anyone who's got ideas of either guests or topics you'd like us to cover, just let us know. We love ideas, right, Pete?
Absolutely.
We do. All right, Jason, thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week.
See ya.
Have a great night.